So in this video I'm going to be breaking down some cold hard truths about Scott McTominay, David De Gea, Antony, Fred, Weghorst and pretty much most of the Manchester United side, not specifically from the Liverpool game, but just some issues in general that I think have been bubbling under, but because United have been on such a good run of form, have been put to the side and kind of ignored. But before I go any further, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's video, OneFootball, which has become my favourite football app because it has everything you need to keep up to date with the latest news and transfers, providing you with articles to read as well as videos to watch, whilst also being excellent for keeping up to date with all the matches from across the world that are going on, providing a live ticker as well as match ratings and statistics, whilst also allowing you to check your team stats from across the whole season. If you're sick of having to use Google and Twitter to search for news and stats that you want to see, then the OneFootball app is definitely the app for you, so I'll leave it linked in the description below, and by downloading the app you will be helping to support the channel. So I'm going to start off with my opinions that I think most people will agree with, but as we go deeper into the video we'll get on to what I think people would refer to as my unpopular opinions. So after this video go to the comments and let me know which ones you agreed with and which ones you didn't. So we'll start off with Scott McTominay, who I just don't think is good enough for Manchester United, even to be a squad player, and I don't see the point in keeping him for next season. As whilst he has shown signs of improvement under Erik ten Hag, don't get me wrong, he's still nowhere near the level needed in order to be competing for a starting spot, and I think that's what squad players have to do. There's no point just having squad players who are only just going to be squad players. You need players who have the potential to challenge the first team starters, otherwise you end up in a situation that Manchester United have been in, where Casemiro was out of the side for a sustained period. I know it was only 3 domestic games, however it was 3 domestic games at a crucial part in the season, and after his fairly impressive start to the season, you would have expected Scott McTominay to be able to come into the side and really stamp his authority on the United midfield, even if he didn't take Casemiro's spot permanently, which obviously would be a massive task. He should have at least been able to come in and cover well for those 3 games, filling Casemiro's spot pretty seamlessly. However, to me McTominay is a lot more similar to Fred than he is to Casemiro, in the sense that both Fred and McTominay are very limited central midfielders, not just in the attributes that they possess, but the roles or role that they are capable of performing. And out of the 2, Fred is definitely the better player, and that's why we've seen the Brazilian become a mainstay in United's team over recent weeks, whereas McTominay has really struggled to find a spot in this central midfield. Now don't get me wrong, I do think that McTominay shows signs of potentially being a very valuable squad player for United in the future, in the same way that former United players like Ji-Sung Park, Darren Fletcher and John O'Shea were at the start of their careers. However, unlike those players, I don't think McTominay has the versatility or the reliability to come in and produce in big games when it matters. I think if he was able to play a variety of different positions, say at right back, maybe even at centre back as well, or maybe even further forward as an attacking midfielder, then I definitely think this would aid his case for staying at United. But once you remember that McTominay isn't in his early 20s anymore, he's now 26, then at that point patience is wearing thin, because if he hasn't developed into the sort of player that Darren Fletcher, John O'Shea or Ji-Sung Park turned out to be by that age, is he ever going to really get to that level? But what really spells the end for McTominay at Manchester United, to me at least, is that Ten Hag is preferring to play Weghorst as a central midfielder alongside Fred, in what is essentially a tailor-made role for McTominay when you look at his attributes. He's big, he's strong, he should be good in the air just like Weghorst, but he's also a lot more athletic and got better energy than Weghorst as well, which you think would give him the edge, but Ten Hag still prefers the Dutchman. And in all honesty, having watched both players play in that area over the last few weeks, you'd have to say that Weghorst is the better option. He somehow has a contract until 2025 because he signed a deal in January 2020, which is just another fine example of the lack of ambition and retardation from the Solskjaer era. But I guess a good part about that is United could probably still get a quite substantial fee for McTominay. I'd say United could probably get between 25 and 30 million pounds from a club like Newcastle, West Ham or Everton, and if they were to offer anywhere between that, I would 100% be taking that. So whilst most people probably agree that McTominay isn't good enough for Manchester United going forward, I think opinion is definitely going to be a lot more split on Fred's future. My opinion is that whilst Fred is a very valuable player in the squad at the moment, being able to perform the role of a pressing industrious central midfielder very effectively, particularly in big games, I just don't see him having a long-term future at Man United, and there's a few reasons why. The first is that I just don't think he's good enough in possession, and he's far too limited as a central midfielder, and we see this in games where teams sit deep and compact, and compared to Christian Eriksen or even Casemiro, Fred lacks the technical ability to get the ball under control quickly and circulate it efficiently, taking far too long in certain areas. He also doesn't really have the creativity needed from deep positions, and so this puts a greater creative burden on the players around him like Lisandro Martinez and Casemiro. However, unlike McTominay, Fred at least excels in big games where he's got to be utilised more as a pressing central midfielder, with United overall playing a more direct style of play, which means that Fred's lack of technical ability in congested areas isn't as exposed. Now personally, I wouldn't have extended Fred's contract for another season in December. I think that was definitely a bit of a premature move from Manchester United, particularly with the potential Qatari takeover giving United the funds to bring in more players. Fred is now 30, so this is probably going to be as good as he gets, and whilst I probably would keep him for another season now that he's signed another contract, I definitely think he can't be United's first choice alternative central midfielder. He really has to be a player used for special occasions, particularly big matches where United need a bit more industry and energy in the centre of the pitch. But ideally for me, United would get rid of McTominay and bring in two central midfielders, with one being a Christian Eriksen improvement coming in alongside Casemiro, dropping Eriksen down to an alternative and a player who can potentially come off the bench, but someone who isn't a starter. But United also need a Casemiro backup, potentially a younger player who essentially offers a lot of what Fred already offers, but is a better technical player and can also play that deep single pivot position, which I don't think Fred can. And so this would drop Fred down to United's 5th choice central midfielder, which is currently what McTominay is at this point in the squad. And I think that's what his role should be going forward, a player who can come in and play specific roles during specific matches, but someone who's not going to be relied upon as heavily as he is now. I mean, Fred is a good player, don't get me wrong, but there's just better players that United could go and get. Just off the top of my head, I can think of a few: Kudeo Kone, Yusuf Fofana, Maghsan Kakare, Matteo Guendouzi and Yunus Musa would all be improvements on Fred, whilst also being able to fulfill a similar role on the pitch. So I think if United could get, say, 15 million for Fred this summer, I would sell him, or at the very most keep him as a squad player to fulfill specific roles in specific games for next season. But now we move on to one of my opinions that I think will actually be quite unpopular amongst the Man United fan base, but I think most neutrals and supporters of other Premier League clubs would agree with me. And that opinion is that I just don't think Antony is anywhere near good enough to be a starter for United, and I would go as far to say that Alejandro Garnacho and Amad Diallo are not just better players currently, but have a lot more potential than Antony. And I think in 2 or 3 seasons time, 2025, 2026, the common consensus will be that both of those players are better than Antony. To me at least, the only things that Antony offers to a significant level is firstly his work rate defensively from a pressing point of view, and secondly that curling shot when he cuts in on his left foot from the right side. But apart from these 2 areas, I think Antony has many deficiencies in his game. Firstly, his lack of ability to even use his right foot is definitely something that I think is problematic, as even though you can point to players like Mo Salah and Arjen Robben who were very one-footed, they were so exceptionally good on their left foot in terms of their ball control and ability to shift it quickly, that they still retain that element of unpredictability, or at least in Arjen Robben's case, the element of being purely unstoppable when he cut in on his left foot. With Antony, every time he gets the ball, not just me but the defenders he's up against know exactly what he wants to do. He wants to cut in on that left foot, and because he doesn't even have the ability to run down the outside of the fullback just holds his ground, and this leads to Antony slowing up the attack and inevitably looking for a pass backwards. I also think his decision making and end product in the final third in terms of picking and producing the right pass is very disappointing as well. He doesn't seem to have really improved from the start of the season, and particularly in the game against Liverpool there were a number of times where he got the ball in the final third, and if he could pick the right pass it could set up United for a great opportunity. And some of you may be thinking I'm being too harsh on Antony, but if so, go to FBref and check out Antony's full FBref report. I am going to be doing a full video statistically analysing him, so I won't go into that in depth here. But if you look at that, you can see that his chance creating metrics are absolutely abysmal, with him ranking in the 8th percentile or below for his key passes, expected assists and XG assisted. And there's really no way around it. Even if you are someone who thinks stats are overrated, the numbers don't lie, and when you're struggling to produce from the eye test as well, I think it's something that United have to be concerned about. Yes, you can say that he needs time, but this is Man United, it's not Antony FC, and just because he was signed for a massive sum in the summer, and obviously has the surrounding hype around him, doesn't mean that Ten Hag can continue to persist with him if it is at the detriment to the side's performance as a whole. I think Antony is the biggest example of why you shouldn't overpay for potential, as now United are in kind of a dilemma with him. He's cost too much money and on too big wages to even really think about loaning him out, even though I think if he was a 20 to 30 million pound player that would be the best option. But United are going to kind of just have to stay with him and hope he turns out well. And I do think there are kind of similarities to the Donny van de Beek signing, When he was signed, I made, I think, 1 or 2 videos where I specified why I didn't think he was the right signing for Man United, specifically because I just didn't think there was a role for him in the side, and I got a lot of criticism for it, but that turned out to be right, and I'm getting the same kind of suspicions with Antony. I think it doesn't help his case that United have players like Amad Diallo, Sancho, and Garnacho, who are all players who I rate higher than the Brazilian. A lot of people will say that I shouldn't criticise Antony and we shouldn't get on the backs of players, but this is Man United, this isn't an under-12 side. I think if you have to resort to the excuse of not criticising players just because we don't want to be mean to them, I think that pretty much says everything about your argument. However, I do think there's a player that could be unlocked with Antony, and so I'm going to be doing a full video, not only analysing his troubles at the moment, but how I think Ten Hag could actually turn him into a top level talent. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss out on that video. But my next cold hard truth, which I suspect is probably going to be the most unpopular one, is that whilst he's at least top 3 best shot stoppers in world football at the moment, United should be looking for an improvement on David De Gea. Now, despite saying this, I would still be open to Ten Hag keeping David De Gea for maybe 1 or 2 seasons, as I do think there's a valid argument to be made that his shot stopping ability does outweigh his ball playing deficiencies, and I could see how a good argument could be made for that. But the worst argument for keeping De Gea that I see a lot of people making is that the main reason why keepers are there is to stop shots going in, which to me just shows a lack of football intelligence. Yes, keepers are there to stop shots going in, but there's a lot more to being a goalkeeper than simply stopping shots. It's like saying centre backs are there to simply defend and not pass the ball, or that strikers are only there to score goals. In terms of what's asked of modern goalkeepers, there's sweeping, there's cross-claiming, shot stopping, and of course in a system like Ten Hag's ball playing ability. Like with Antony, I'm going to do a full analysis video on David De Gea where I actually point out what a ball playing keeper could bring to United, as I think people just completely overlook it. I don't think they really understand why or how keepers like ter Stegen and Ederson are so important to their side. And I've also seen people suggest that it's because De Gea's not British, which once again is just a load of bullshit. If you remember when Guardiola came in, Joe Hart was the keeper, and there were the same sort of defenders there, and then after Ederson came in the season after, everyone saw just how much difference an elite ball playing keeper can make. And there's also this weird narrative that if a keeper's good with his feet, he's automatically bad at shot stopping, which just isn't the case at all. And so I think most of it is just that people don't understand what a keeper is actually meant to do in possession, and they'd rather see things as black or white. Either you want De Gea to stay and you think he's the best keeper in the world, or you want him to be replaced because you don't think he's good at all. When in reality, I don't think you could say that De Gea isn't a world-class goalkeeper, it's just that he's not a world-class ball-playing keeper. And so at the end of the day, whilst I actually think De Gea has been one of United's best players this season, and certainly isn't the biggest problem for United at the moment, I do think that in Ten Hag's ideal team, which may be this summer, maybe next summer, maybe even the summer after, United will need an improvement on De Gea, and I think over the 2 legs against Barcelona, the disparity between ter Stegen and De Gea's distribution was drastic. And so it's more that De Gea isn't a fit for the system and the style of play, rather than him not being a good enough goalkeeper. So let me know which of the opinions you agreed with and which you didn't. You can check out some of my other videos which will be linked in the description. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you do get notified when all the videos I've mentioned come out. And you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter for more content as well.